All right, Zig coming in on the top today on the show for the third time, which is insane to say. We have Kevin Eastman. This is such an honor. Every time, I'm like, this guy can't be any nicer. He's such a cool guy. It's so cool. It's so surreal that I get to say that for the third time. Kevin Eastman is on the show. It's so cool. I held it together a little better because last time I was with Cody. And this time, I was first up on the press list, which means you have to be super punctual. So I wrote everything out. I tried not to be rude to anyone who's following after me. You know, it's like being the opener. You don't go past your 45 minutes. You know, so this one may feel a little different than the other ones because the other two we were on the very end. We were the last ones because, the podcast guys put them on last. And I can't thank Kevin Eastman's team enough. They're always super, super polite and considerate and easiest to work with and very thoughtful. So shout outs to Courtney and Jasmine. Okay, if you made it this far and you're like, well, who is Kevin Eastman? Kevin Eastman is co-creator of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, comic book author and artist, and DIY comic icon. Really, Kevin Eastman. So cool. It doesn't get old. It's so cool and such an honor still. Okay. Kevin's got a lot going on. Right now, The Last Ronin has wrapped up. The 5th issue is out now, and it's capping maybe one of the largest Turtles comic events yet. No spoilers during this conversation, so you can listen through if you haven't read. We recommend, and by we, I mean my friend Coda and I. So if you're new to the show, I'm your humble host. My name is Dave. I play in a band called Sea Level, letter C dash, with my best friend Coda Kroos and Pat Boland. And we are 3 comic-obsessed musicians. So we want to recommend, if you're going to pick up The Last Ronin, issue 5, you go to Comics Are Go, and if you use their online Facebook Live auctions, you might recognize our sounds from their themes. We recorded the Comics Are Go theme at the beginning and at the end, the punk and this like folk song, and Ground Zero. So, if you're in Ohio and you want to support local comic stops, that's where we recommend. Yeah. All right, friends, before we get to my conversation with Kevin, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it really helps me keep talking to cool guests and sharing their insights with you. And if you haven't heard the first 2 conversations, I highly recommend diving into both. The first one was one of the most mind-blowing experiences for me. I spent hours in front of my computer like I'm doing now, waiting to talk with Kevin, and like it's one of the most inspiring conversations I've had. So, here we go. Returning for the 3rd time, Kevin Eastman.
Good to talk to you again. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Thanks so much for having me again. I appreciate it. All right.
Absolute pleasure, mate.
Well, let's jump into it. How was the Green Day concert?
Dude, it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was, after certainly, being a longtime fan of Green Day for sure, and not having had the opportunity to be at a live concert, live music event for quite a long time, just added it, put it right at the top of the list of one of my favorite shows ever. So it was great, and certainly Weezer was kick-ass, and the whole thing was just an absolute treat. It was great.
Beautiful. There's I don't know, getting around people again and just it's like new. I don't know. It's like doing it for the first time again. It's like real fresh and exciting. So that I'm glad you had a good time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally, 100%. Thank you.
I wanted to ask what's the magic of the blue pen?
The blue pen is it like the blue pencil that I use to work with, or to, well, what's interesting is it was something that was originally used as just kind of a guide for layout. Like if you were doing lettering, or if you're doing just like a blue pencil, especially non-reproduction blue pencil, you could sort of block in the space, the illustration you wanted to do, perspectives and all that stuff, without having to erase it. And then when you go back in and pencil it and then ink on top of it, when you would then photograph it for reproduction, you wouldn't see the blue in it. But then that evolved into, so I started using it as a guide to, like when I would do a layout for a cover, it was just a way that I could move really quickly through a design where I would do the basic layout structure, then I would go straight in and ink with the Sharpie, and it usually was submission for approval to somebody that wanted me to do a cover or come up with designs or even do layouts for pages. And so then I would do that, and then as an additional guide to sort of give it more impact, I started adding shading and toning and stuff like that. So less black and white, less black, more shading, and it sort of helped round out and sort of give you the perspective. And then it would serve another purpose as a general guide to tones or shadowing and lighting for colors. So when I sent the finished black and white piece on, I would send the blue line pencil as well to say, this is what, was my lighting source, and this is what I was thinking of kind of shadowing it. So that kind of helps set the mood. And it's fun to do. It makes it feel like a more complete illustration to me. So I've done it for quite a long time.
Yeah, I've noticed going through the director's cuts and some of the Mirage compounded or compiled books that a lot of the sketches have that blue, and that makes sense. So you can see every step of the way almost, and really kind of guide it and direct it. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So moving.
Yeah. No, that was it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. One thing I kind of wanted to get into with you today is like you and Peter, and like it seems like this was such like a lightning in a bottle thing, and you guys have always given back, and I find that super inspiring. Like just even with Tundra and what Peter did with his nonprofit. But one particular event I found real fascinating, and I kind of wanted to pick your brain about it, was when you did the first, I think, Donatello solo story, where he meets Jack Kirby, and that issue was all going to go towards to help Jack Kirby pay with. Like, one, that's such a cool opportunity to do, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're right. No, it was, I loved, certainly what I was doing with Tundra was one way to pursue, giving back to the community that gave us so much. Peter's Zurich Foundation, which was a great way to fund self-publishing. People would submit stuff, and then he would fund the full completion of the work plus printing kind of thing. Kind of was an early version of patronism as far as like a Kickstarter format. Thinking that we going back to where we borrowed $1,300 from my uncle back in the day to print the very first issue of Turtles. But so philanthropy has been something that's we've always had a part of our life. And then going specifically to the Donatello one shot, there was a time period, and it was actually Jack Kirby for the longest time was not given full credit where credit's due for the work that he contributed to Marvel, and there was a number of reasons for that. One, there were some trademark concerns of the corporation that owned Marvel and all things Marvel. The early work that he did at that time period, all artists worked under a work for hire scenario. So they, and Kirby himself said, we knew what we were signing. We didn't like it per se, but we knew we were working for a company that whatever we created, the company would own it. But at the same time, it went way past a time period where, credit should be given where credit is due. And, there were, a lot of people that felt that other people took credit for other people's work. I mean, Bob Kane's story with Bill Finger is fairly notorious in many ways, that he took credit for a lot of things that Bill Finger and other people contributed to Batman without giving credit to where credit is due. So there was a fight to get not only Jack's artwork back, but to have him get more official recognition for the work that he contributed to the Marvel Universe. And so there was kind of there was a big legal battle going on, and the Comics Journal was one of the magazines, news, like let's call it like a Newsweek or Time for comics, was one of the people out there really pushing and commenting directly to the creative community, the comic book creative community and fan community, that Jack should get his artwork back, because even back in those days, Marvel kept all the artwork that they created, and I think Kirby, from Marvel alone, and I'm just from what I remember, he did at least he did somewhere around the neighborhood of 8,000 pages plus for just Marvel over his lifetime of doing stuff for them and creating stories and rewrote a lot of that stuff. So we reached out to Jack, and there was a lot of people that were doing fundraisers, and we reached out to his family and said that we wanted to do this tribute to him. And we asked his permission, and then Peter came up with the story, which I thought was just absolutely brilliant. What it became, but then we asked if we could contribute all the profits from the sales of this issue to his legal fight, to contribute to his legal costs. And he gave us permission to do it, but he refused to take the money, and he just said, "No, you kids are great. He really appreciated how much he meant to so many people, that how, because he was our biggest inspiration. That was my childhood dream, was to follow in the footsteps and grow up to be as much like Jack Kirby as I could." But no, that was a great issue, and he was a great, man, obviously. And he's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today, is because of, his inspiration. So, but yeah, that was it. He ultimately said no to the funds, but we made other donations from it in his name to the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund and other, comic book based things. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that, like, when I read that story, like, because I remember reading like an adaptation of that story, like that it wasn't a comic when I first read it. It was like a kid's book version of it. And that story always fascinated me. So learning that was your chance to give back to your hero is like, that's so cool. That's the most like DIY, like community building thing ever. And like, it's even cooler that he said no. I just think that makes his character so like, not no to the story, but like, no, use it. Don't give me the money. Thanks for the recognition. Like, that's so beautiful. And then if that doesn't keep you going,
No, you're right, and that's that's the kind of guy he was. He's he is all that and more. He was a legend, and will always be so. So, but yeah, that was awesome. The whole experience was something.
Very cool, very cool. One thing I wanted to on the idea, like, I remember reading that story initially from like this book, like adaptation of it. And one thing I kind of wanted to ask you about was like, you've been doing with the Kevin Eastman Studios, like you do this like memorabilia auction every month. And I wanted to ask, what's the like most like bizarre and entertaining thing you've found going through that? Because this is like, you're cleaning out the studio, right? And like that's where all this stuff is coming from, years of like memorabilia that you've collected. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. There was so much of it is because I, in so many aspects of my life, I'm a complete and utter pack rat, and that I still have, I'm actually staring at them now. I've still got comic books and stuff from when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, all the way through, and different things I collected, and toys and stuff. And then when it came to the Turtles, there was certainly a time period when it was early on in the Turtles evolution as an entertainment property that Peter and I were just so excited with the different things that were going, that we'd always make sure that we tried to keep at least one of every single item that was produced, certainly in the early days. But then oftentimes, when companies produce turtle items, they would send a case of this or a case of that or a big box of this. And we'd divide it up between each other, and then give some to friends and family and some other guys in the studio. And so what I would do is I'd end up taking multiple copies of this, that, and the other thing, and putting them into boxes for long-term storage. And fast forward to exactly what you said is that, over the years, as we sort of been refining that and reducing, the amount of stuff we have, would take it back to say, if I had 10 of one particular item, I'd keep one and then would take the other 9 and put them up on the auction site, kind of thing. So yeah, that's where so much of that. And then, even recently, I found, it's like a small stack of, door hangers where it says, no entry without pizza kind of thing. Which was just, really funny. I found little backing boards to some of there was a company called Dark Horse that made these little lead based miniature figures for the role playing games back in the day. And so they would create these backing boards that then they would, put the product in and then seal it up and ship it off to hobby stores and things. And so I just found some plain backing boards without even the turtle stuck to them. We designed it specifically for them. Pete and I drew a turtle, and I painted it, and that became the printed backing board. But it's always a treat to go through these boxes and find, flat cereal boxes that, from the, that sugar-free turtle cereal we did. Ha, 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 ha. So no, I love those treasures, and I'm always, surprised to remember what I forgot. Like, oh God, I remember this, oh, holy smokes. But what's fun, but this still, I know it sounds incredible, but it's, after all these years, there's still boxes of stuff I'm going through and finding that kind of stuff. So there will be more showing up on the site.
That's awesome. So, the one that blew me away the last time I saw it was the vanilla pies that were green that you've recently posted.
God, yeah, those are. Yeah, I mean, I've got a serious sweet tooth, but I remember that those were a little funky. But I've talked to different fans over the years, and I'd mentioned that, and I said, "Oh, I thought that was a little funky," and a couple of fans were like, "Oh, I loved them. I thought they were great." And I'm like, "Well, bless you."
Yeah, I mean, they definitely look sweet. I feel like if I was younger, that would definitely be I would definitely have no problem with it. Now it's kind of like, it's coated in sugar.
Yeah.
But on a more serious question, I read that April O'Neil was based off a real person. Is this true?
In part, yeah, and
Okay.
and it was mainly in name. It was a person that I had dated in high school back in the day, and her name was April. And then when Pete and I were coming up with in the second issue, we wanted to add a kind of a strong female character that we liked, that we enjoyed in pop culture, things like, Lieutenant Ripley or Sarah Connor or those kind of things. We wanted someone that would be a kind of a surrogate, a sister-like figure to the Turtles, but a strong-minded and bring in, and she was originally a scientist, which was one of the elements that we brought back in the IDW, series. But so it was the first version. She was kind of a mixture of kind of an Asian American, maybe with some African American in there, kind of as a mix, as a melting pot of cultures, because
Right.
It's our universe, and loved it. And then and she evolved in many different iterations over the years, but it was so the first name April was inspired by this young lady I knew, who's unfortunately since passed away, and then O'Neil. And I remember Pete and I talked about this once, where the O'Neil came from, and it was like we thought immediately there was a really great writer editor that worked for both Marvel and DC named Denny O'Neil, and we were thinking like maybe it was inspired by Denny because we were a big fan of his work, or it was just one of those funny sort of Irish names that I don't know. It was like, hey, Flannery O'Neill. I don't know. It just seemed April O'Neil just seemed to work, and when you're working, when that idea like that comes and you just sort of blurt it out and write it down and that's it. It's carved in stone or it's printed. And then you don't think about it again until, years later, a question like this, like, well, where the heck did that come from? So, but that's true. So, there was a person in my life I knew named April, and that was part of the inspiration.
Got it. And so kind of like with that whole process of like finding a partner like Pete to work with and balance out and like take an idea that's from nowhere and kind of make it into a person that evolves into who they are now, at least character dynamic wise. With like, and this may be a bigger question. I don't know if it's, but like working, like Mirage eventually became a team because it had to, which is amazing because it grew and like, but going through that, what are some key elements from the Mirage days as a team that were like important into bringing into the IDW days? Like from what I understand, IDW brought you on, so like there were some other people kind of working on it already, but a team dynamic to make a story like The Last Ronin is so important to have that like withstand like all these like delays and like all these like obstacles that overcome. Like what are some like key elements that make a team like that work?
Well, it's a great question, and it's an interesting concept. In part that we've ourselves learned a lot more about as we grew and the business grew and we added more people to the team. But the basic concept that we knew, both Peter and I, as fans of comic books and wanting to do that as a career, that we knew that when you read the credits in a comic book, that there were multiple people involved in bringing a story to life, and certainly in part because of the amount of work if you're doing putting together a monthly comic. So, for example, you'd have you have the publisher, then you have the overall editor, which might be like a Stan Lee type of character. Then you would have a writer that would actually write the story, and then oftentimes you'd have a separate penciler who would then pencil it, and a separate inker who would ink it, and then another person would be a colorist, and then you'd have a letterer. And it created sort of, again, because the time, if you were doing, say, a 22-page, 24-page story, which comics were back in the early days, Silver Age, if you will, and even before, as a monthly comic, that's, if you're putting out one a month, it's almost like a page a day that you have to complete. And the only way to do it is by having a whole team of people that you can sort of roll it over like a production line. So as the penciler finishes a page, say on day one, he's handing it to the letterer and then the inker on day two, and then so the process continues. It's almost like almost factory like, but and a creative factory. And this was sort of based on systems that were built like when Jack Kirby came up with Captain America with Joe Simon. They had their the Kirby Simon studio, which they had besides themselves as creative directors and writing and drawing and stuff. They had other artists that would do lettering, that would do inking, and that would do backgrounds and do stuff so they could put out some newspaper daily strips or comic books, or fulfill 3 or 4 different comic books a month, sort of like as a creative house or creative factory, much like you might imagine an animation company right now these days, or even back in those days, that you'd have small boutique and sometimes larger animation studios that would have a whole team of people because everything was hand drawn back in those days. So that concept was established. So it was not new to us, the concept of having a team. And so when Pete and I started working together, it was, we thought it was cool already that we both wrote and we both drew. We could pencil and ink, and I ended up, doing the lettering. So we were kind of at our own mini team, which we did everything. We did the editing, the writing, the lettering, you name it, we did it all. And then as the business grew and managing the business took more and more time, it created something's got to give. So you end up with less time drawing than you'd like to because you need to be on top of your business issues. And so bringing in other artists to help with not only writing chores for a number of different titles, Turtles, Tales of the Turtles, the Archie comic was packaged by Mirage. Then we had the whole element of licensing art, which was when somebody would license a turtle image for, say, whoopie pies or those, those green pies. A lot of times that they would need package art done to a certain size and a certain design to a certain specification. And so we offered up, our studio that we could provide you for a fee, obviously, to do those art exactly do you need, and it would come pre-approved, because otherwise they would have to go find a freelance artist, create the illustration, then send it to us for approval. And so we sort of took a step out of there. So we did a lot of that stuff in-house, which streamlined it and then made more money for the artists instead of them losing out to another freelancer. They were still freelancing, but within our company. And we were able to give them, different benefits and put them on kind of a payroll thing. So they were doing a lot of work in a better environment where the work was steady and the work needed to be done. So that sort of bled over to, a more traditional system with IDW as a more traditional comic company like, Dark Horse or Marvel and DC still exists today, and Boom and things, is that there's a variety of, one creator that writes and draws to a creator that works with one creator that's a writer, and then that's an artist, and they team up. And then you still have a lot of team aspect, like, say, some of the licensed comics where you might have one penciler, one inker, one colorist, one letterer, one writer. And so that's when they brought me into the Turtles, was that they had already hired, Tom Walsh was already on staff, and Tom had come up with what he wanted to do under the construction of a new Turtle universe and under the IDW banner. So he'd come up with a concept, which I thought was brilliant. And then they brought me in to consult on it, which then from that grew, year to year as the series grew and continued in popularity. So Tom and I started working together more and more on, plots and directions and story arcs and different characters to bring in. But ultimately, Tom did all the real heavy lifting, where, the guy, should be commended for. I mean, he wrote 100 scripts. He wrote 100 issues, and that's that's 10, almost 11 years consistently, and the issues are great. And it takes a village to do it, but he was the main head writer, and we get to work with many different artists that help bring those stories to life, and the whole IDW village, if you will, to help bring that stuff to life was just a fantastic environment to work in.
So
great.
Is it the passion,
creative people,
the passion of each individual that makes the whole thing work? Like, is that like kind of like a key to making all this? Because having such a big team, being able to deliver it as emotionally and intense from one creative to another, is that kind of the key? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, totally. It's like you could almost think of it as very similar to a rock band or a band, or a sports team, or a thing that the passion comes first. You wanting to commit yourself in your life and follow that dream of that's what you want to do, whether it's writing, playing soccer or football, or a drummer in a band, to drawing comic books. Passion comes first, and when you come into that kind of environment where you understand the structures, that you have to bring your A game, and that includes the passion and your skills and your ideas, and you work with other people in that environment to make it all work. So it's it's okay to have an ego, but it's but not that much of an ego, because there's always give and take, and you've got to be willing to work well with others for the best possible end result, which is a good story that visually looks as spectacular as the team can make it, and you put your best foot forward and best effort, and hope for the best, and that's kind of that's your barometer. That's how that's what you do, why you do, and that's what.
Yeah.
And you know, like anything else you love, the hours are very long. You got to love it to want to do it.
Definitely. Beautifully said. One more question, because I know I'm starting it off, and you got a lot more after me. On the concept of a rock band,
Yep.
One of the coolest B covers I think that came out of the last after 100 issues was that AC/DC Highway to Hell cover you did. I think it was 1/7. No, that can't be right. I'm forgetting what number it was, but that was the coolest. And when I was growing up, it was Turtles and AC/DC. So for me, that was this is the coolest piece of art I've ever seen. But
I love it.
what is your favorite song off Highway to Hell?
All of them. No, it's one of the best albums of all time. That was, because I was in a, we talked about this before. I know I was in a, for 15 minutes in high school, I was in a band, and I loved it. And it ended up being, I wasn't that good as an artist, and I wasn't good as a bass player. So it was either you have to choose one and dedicate yourself to get better at one or the other. And I like drawing more. No, the things like that was just. I think it evolved out of a conversation I was having with another friend of mine about music. He's a musician, and we're talking about this, that, and that. AC/DC came up, and I was like, "Oh yeah!" And I said, "Man, I always loved that, Highway to Hell album cover." Around the time that the Turtles were evolving in this storyline that had. Sophie Campbell brought in a lot of these music elements, like there was a band and there was a battle of the bands, and that sort of one thing led to the next. And I said, I've got to do some. And it was actually heading towards a period in the story. It was around Halloween, and I said, "Duh, it would be great if the guys dressed up like AC/DC band members and sort of recreate that same basic pose." From the album cover. And so that's one of my favorites as well. I really love doing that. And there's another one that was a couple issues later that ended up that particular story arc culminated in a battle of the bands where Bebop and Rocksteady come in and play. So having them on stage playing, I think Rocksteady's jumping in the air holding the guitar, and he's breaking a couple of the strings on it by accident as he's into it. He's playing it so hard, yeah. Yeah, that's the fun stuff, and it's sort of great to step outside the Turtles getting ready to fight or in the middle of a fight or some kind of real dramatic moment and really have fun with a cover like that. That's a real treat. I really enjoyed that. I'm glad you mentioned it. That was a lot of fun.
Is the coolest. But we didn't really talk about you being a band. We talked about harmonica, but let's put a pin in that for hopefully a next one down the road. But have you ever done an album cover for a band?
Absolutely. I don't think so. And my hesitation, I was thinking, it was only because I had just finished. About 2 weeks ago, I've been working with we might have talked about this before. I'm working with a company called Waxworks Records, and they released the original score soundtrack for Turtles Movie 1, Turtles Movie 2, Secret of the Ooze, and they just did Turtles in Time, which was the third original Turtle movie. So I do the front cover, back cover, the inside spread, and even design a little label, whether it be a pizza or a sewer cover that's actually in the middle of the album. So I've done, those double album illustrations for the Turtle stuff, which has just been an absolute blast to do. But I can't recall ever doing one specifically for a band, which would be fun. which would be fun to do, because I was, you know, a big Richard Corbett fan, and I loved he did the cover Bat for Meatloaf's "Bat Out of Hell," which was great. One of my favorite album covers. It was awesome.
Well, that album cover makes you pick up
maybe
that album, you know? Like, I feel like that album cover sold that album. Like, it's a great record. It holds up. But that cover is what brings you to it.
Totally. 100%. Yeah, very cool. So,
awesome.
But yeah, so maybe that's, and now I'm going to have to go look and see if I don't think I have. I would have, you know, my memory isn't too bad yet. That I would have remembered it. But we'll have to go check the archives. But yeah, so you know, could be something to add to the bucket list for sure.
Very cool, awesome, Kevin. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It was a great honor to be added again and not hung up once once I called. So thank you so much, and
not a problem.
Congratulations with everything with the last Ronin. I'm very excited to read that last issue, and thank you, man.
Absolute pleasure. Always a pleasure talking to you, and we'll do it again one day soon. But yeah, had a great time talking to you. Have a great rest of your day, and be safe out there.
Thanks. Likewise. Cowabunga.
Cowabunga. Cheers.
Later.